Have you ever given a present that was just a total flop? So a couple years ago, Chelsea had a great idea for my birthday present. Yes, I got her permission to say this. So my birthday is in May, and that winter, I'd been talking for a while about how I wanted to go golfing a little bit more. I grew up going golfing. I went a lot with my dad, with our family, but now I'm lucky if I go like once a year at this point. And so I'd mentioned it to her once or twice that the coming summer I'd be interested a little more. So she gave me this super thoughtful gift, a gift certificate to the local golf course here in Aberdeen. And when I got it, I was really excited. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I need to get out on the course. I mean, it was pretty generous. I could have gone a handful of times that summer. You ever had really good intentions and then just like zero follow through? So I get this gift certificate and I'm like, yes, this is what I need. And that summer, I didn't go at all. And so that is like late July, early August. I'm finally like, all right, I need to actually go at least one time this summer. And so I was like, let me grab the gift certificate and I'm going to go at least one time. Here's the problem. I couldn't remember where I put it. And on top of that, they didn't give us like a plastic credit card, kind of gift card. It was literally like a little sheet of paper. And so long story short, I totally lost this very generous gift card that Chelsea had given me. I have no idea where it went, and 2 years later, I still haven't found it, and I still haven't gone golfing here. So that it was really well-intentioned, but ended up being a bit of a flop, totally my fault. Fortunately, not every act of generosity in our lives ends up this way, right? We can actually have a tremendous impact on someone's life with the right gift, the right act of generosity at the right time. In fact, our generosity can actually provide for other people in some really powerful ways. And so this morning, my goal is, as we dive into the second chapter of Ruth, is to talk about how God uses our generosity to benefit, to provide for the people around us. So we're in the second week of our series, Ruth, Living Generously. We are reading the book of Ruth through the lens of generosity and taking note of incredible acts of generosity found throughout this book. Last week, we set up the story where a woman named Naomi and her husband Elimelech, who were Israelites living during the time of the Judges, left for Moab due to a famine. And while in Moab, Elimelech died. Their sons married, but then their sons also died. And this left 3 widows alone to fend for themselves in a world that was not set up for widows to be able to provide for themselves. And so where we ended it last week was Naomi and her daughter-in-law Ruth headed back to Israel together. And that's where we'll pick up this morning. So this morning we're going to be in Ruth. We're going to be mostly in Ruth chapter 2. But if you go back one verse to Ruth chapter 1, verse 22, that is where we're going to start this morning. The text will be on the screen, but if you have the YouVersion Bible app on your phone, if you have a paper Bible with you, I would encourage you to turn there. We'll spend the bulk of our time there this morning. Ruth chapter 1, verse 22. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by her daughter-in-law Ruth, the young Moabite woman. They arrived in Bethlehem in late spring and at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. One day, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters, and as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. So Ruth and Naomi set out to return to Israel. They go back to the town of Bethlehem. It's late spring. It's during the barley harvest. That'll all be important in a moment. The author also takes a break from that to mention a man named Boaz, who's described as a wealthy and influential man. And something I want to note here is that in the context of ancient Israel, wealth was often, not exclusively, but often a sign of godliness. There are plenty of wealthy, horrible people in the Old Testament, but often when you looked at a common person, not like a king, but a common person in Israel becoming wealthy, that was often a sign that they were faithfully following Yahweh and that he was blessing them because of it. Well, anyway, one day Ruth wants to go out and try and get some food. Again, it's difficult for widows to provide for themselves, and you've got two here. And so she wants to go out and get some food. Back then, harvesting was all done by hand, right? No combine technology 3,000 years ago. And so sometimes when harvesters were out there picking kind of the grain, either full stalks or just the heads off of the grain, sometimes you would accidentally drop one. And there might be a few people around your field who do not own your field, who didn't plant the grain in your field, who might be waiting around to see you drop one so they can run over and kind of pick up the scraps behind you to be able to provide for themselves or their family. In fact, this was even commanded in the law of Moses. Leviticus 19, 9 through 10 says, when you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. It is the same with your grape crop. Do not strip every last bunch of grapes from the vines, and do not pick up the grapes that fall to the ground. Leave them for the poor and the foreigners living among you. I am the Lord, your God. So the law of Moses had this provision that you were to literally cut corners as you harvested your field, that you should leave some along the edges so that people can come and harvest it for themselves. In addition, if you were to accidentally drop any as you are harvesting, then you were to just leave it on the ground for them to pick up. There's also a command about grapes here, but that doesn't really apply to our story this morning. So I want to note here the purpose in the law of Moses, the purpose for leaving the grain. The unharvested grain on the edges of the field and the dropped grain were specifically to care for two groups of people, the poor and the foreigners living in your land. It was specifically meant to meet the practical, basic sustenance needs of the people who would have the greatest need in their society. And we take this somewhat for granted today, right, in our culture, because today in modern America, we have things like Social Security, we have things like disability, we have things like SNAP. We have these mechanisms in our world to provide food and income to those who are in need. But in the ancient world, and honestly in most of the world today, these social safety nets simply did not exist. If you didn't work, you would starve, and your family would starve. And so this practice in ancient Israel was sort of meant to be a social safety net for the least among them. So at the very least, they would not starve. You wouldn't have a great life, right, if you're just picking up the scraps in the field, but at least you wouldn't starve. So Ruth goes out, and she tries to find one of those fields that's being described in the law of Moses. And this could have gone very poorly for her. I just want to point out, because of the reality of Israel at the time. We read about it in Judges 17, which I think summarizes this time period in Israel's history quite well. It says in verse 6, in those days Israel had no king, and all the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Meaning that Israel during the time of Judges, which was also during the book of Ruth, was not a time when people were particularly known for following the law of Moses. In fact, during this time period, they were actually pretty bad at it most of the time. So Ruth was pretty fortunate that she found someone who owned a field who was actually practicing the law, who was actually leaving some grain for her. So she happens upon a field where someone's doing this, and it happens to belong to a guy named Boaz. Let's learn a little bit about him. Verse 4. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters, and she's been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, Stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly, and when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I'm only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied. "But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." "I hope I continue to please you, sir," she replied. "You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I am not one of your workers." At mealtime, Boaz called to her, "Come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine." So she sat with his harvesters, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat, and she ate all she wanted and still had some left over. When Ruth went back to work again, Boaz ordered his young men, "Let her gather grain right among the sheaves without stopping her, and pull out some heads of barley from the bundles and drop it on purpose for her. Let her pick them up, and don't give her a hard time." So Ruth gathered barley there all day, and when she beat out the grain that evening, it filled an entire basket. She carried it back into town and showed it to her mother-in-law. Ruth also gave her the roasted grain that was left over from the meal. So right out the gate, Boaz is pretty impressive. He literally walked up to his field and his workers there and just begins blessing them in the name of the Lord. Clearly, this is a very godly man, and he clearly trained his workers in following the law of the Lord, right? Leave the grain you drop on the ground, and we don't know for sure, but likely leave the grain on the edges for the poor and for the foreigners. And we know this because Ruth is like already able to harvest before he even shows up on the scene. And so Boaz gets there. He asks who that person is. Clearly, he recognizes her name and knows a little bit of her story. He's impressed by what he's heard. And so then Boaz begins acting in generosity toward Ruth. And as I read through the book of Ruth looking for instances in generosity, this is just another one that leapt off the page to me, how Boaz treats Ruth here. Because if you were here last week, you may remember that we defined generosity as showing readiness to give more of something than is strictly necessary or expected. And so not only was Boaz doing what the law of Moses said, right, leaving some extra around for the poor and for the foreigners to be able to harvest it, he went even further. He went above and beyond what was expected or required of him by the law in helping Ruth. In fact, I would say we see 4 expressions of Boaz operating in generosity toward Ruth. And I think in listing these out, we will see some of the ways that we can participate in generosity as we seek to meet the practical needs of others today. Here's the first one: provision. Boaz met a practical need that Naomi and Ruth had. Not only were his workers trained to leave behind the grain like the law said, but he told his workers to leave extra behind. Like, go out of your way to drop some on purpose so that she has plenty that she can pick up. Here's the thing: we live in a world today full of needs. Right? And I don't have to tell you that. Like, you know this. There are people in our lives, friends and family even, who don't have enough. Even living in Midwest, in the United States of America, like, where we have it pretty good, right? Like, there are still practical needs out there. People we know, strangers in our community, people on the other side of the world. There are these needs. And here's the reality: God uses his followers to meet the needs of people in our world. Like, this has been true from the earliest days, right? When the believers in the book of Acts, when the church started taking up an offering so that they could provide for widows, right, who were economically disadvantaged. Like, this has been true for all of the church's history, that we step up as followers of Jesus to meet the needs of others. And we do this because when we do it, we're being like Jesus. Because Jesus provided for the practical needs of people. Jesus was always feeding people, and he was always healing people. And we can follow the example of Jesus by meeting the needs of people around us when and how we can. We can't meet every need, right? But we can meet one of them. We can meet some of them. And it also, when we do, it opens up the possibility of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with people as an additional benefit. The second thing I see from Boaz is protection. Boaz protected Ruth. One of the dangers Ruth faced in going out into the fields to try and pick some grain is that the fields were mostly full of men. And men who might try to overpower her, men who might try to harm her. And now I'd like to think that Boaz probably had a preference toward hiring people of character, people of integrity, right? People who wouldn't take advantage of someone in that way. But even still, like Boaz, as Ruth is out there, he tells his young men, like, hey, leave her alone, right? Like he goes out of her way to make sure that she is protected. And there will be moments in our lives where God will call upon us to protect others, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to stand up for those who are disadvantaged, those who are downtrodden. Jesus himself stressed the importance of caring for what he called in Matthew 25, the least of these. That one of the ways we'll know that we're following Jesus is by the way that we treat, by the way that we stand up for, the way we protect the least of these. It'll be a reflection of how we treat Jesus himself. The third thing I see is dignity. Dignity. And I think this is critical for how Boaz helped Ruth. Because Boaz could have just handed her a large basket of picked, threshed barley. Right? Like he could have done that. He could have said, don't worry about all this. Here's a bunch of food. Take it and go. Right? The law of Moses could have commanded something to that effect, but it didn't. And I actually think the difference is critical. See, Boaz didn't just see a poor foreigner in need. He saw her as a person made in the image of God. He treated her with kindness and dignity. See, under the system laid out in the law, a hungry person, a poor person, a foreign person, right? They had to work for their food. They didn't have to own the land. They didn't have to even have planted the crops, right? But they did have to put in the hard work to be able to harvest it themselves. They had to go out of town. They had to go find a field. They had to pick it and thresh it, which means like you take you like rub it in your hands or you press it, rub it with something so that the grain part comes out of the stalk at the top, right? So like they had to put in the work themselves in order to get the food. The system allowed people who were struggling to provide for themselves with dignity. They could take advantage of someone else's generosity, but in a way that maintained their own honor, and honor was a big deal back in that culture. And so Ruth was commended for working hard at harvesting. She's barely taking a break out there, working hard, picking up what had been left behind for her, and she was able to provide for herself and for Naomi with her dignity, with her honor intact. And can I be honest with you? I don't know how to translate this well into our world. It gets complicated pretty quickly, doesn't it? I'm glad, I'm genuinely glad we live in a world and in a society today where we have programs set up to help people who are struggling. I don't want those to go away. I'm glad that those exist. I'm glad that we as a church have money set aside to help people who are in need, right? One of the most common ways that we do so is that we help people with gas cards so that they can get to and from work while they are struggling. That is one of the ways that we try and help. I'm glad that we have these things, but sometimes I get concerned that in simply handing someone a check or in simply handing someone a gift card, it comes at the cost of their dignity. Like, I worry about that sometimes. Like, I think the best programs out there, and they do exist, are the programs that help people who are down and out, but not at the cost of their dignity. An example that came to mind was for a while when I lived in Iowa, I was on the board of a crisis pregnancy center where they served young women who were, on the verge of, I'm going to have an abortion because I don't have any other options, right? And so they would come in and they could receive a little bit of counseling. They had an ultrasound machine. You could get a free ultrasound. And what they were met with was really loving and caring people and a ton of resources. Like they had like this giant closet full of kids' clothes of like every size you can imagine, and they had like a ton, like a whole closet full of diapers. They had a ton of like baby formula, and they had like free car seats for anyone who came in. But here's the thing, all that stuff had to be earned in some way. All of it. Like, the bar was usually pretty low. Like, if you attended a church service and brought back a bulletin, that gave you some points that you could spend there, right? Like if you attended a small group at a church, if you attended a parenting class or a marriage class that they put on, if you sat down for any kind of counseling session, whether that was with them or whether that was with someone else, like there were so many different ways to like earn points to be able to get the stuff that people had donated to this organization. But it took some effort. And I think that was a good thing. Like, it allowed people to put in some effort in order to get something that they needed in return. And there's something incredibly dignified about that. It builds people up. And it helps them move forward, not just stay stuck where they're at in the same place. And so in saying this, I'm not trying to advocate for a particular like political policy or program or party. I'm not. I'm just saying that I think we should help people, and I don't think that help should come at the cost of their dignity. I think that is a biblical position. I think that's a Christian position, and I think that's why we see this example of Boaz and Ruth working so well, because he was able to be generous. He was able to help her in her time of need, but not at the cost of her dignity. Let's keep going. One other thing I see from Boaz is a sense of belonging. And this was so important because probably one of the most impressive things that Boaz did in the midst of this story was invite Ruth to join them for a meal. And that it's easy to overlook that. It's easy to kind of minimize that. But this wasn't just about some free food, right? She got like the what was it, like the toasted grain or the cooked grain. And I don't know really what the difference is between like raw grain and toasted grain even is, right? I don't know if it tastes any better. It wasn't about the food. It was that he was welcoming her into community and connection. I mean, you think about like if you have a job with coworkers, right? Like if you take a lunch break together, you just kind of hang out and you talk, right? Like there's something about that creates some camaraderie. That there's something about that creates some community. And Ruth got welcomed in to that community. One of the things we talk about a lot here at Hub City is restoring a sense of community. And it's one of the reasons why I love gatherings, which if you're not familiar with that, it's like an event we try and do about once a month where we eat together and we hang out together as a church family. And there's something about sharing a meal that can really create an important sense of belonging. Jesus did this all the time, right? He was known for constantly having meals with people, and often meals with people that like were looked down upon. Right? Like Jesus would eat he was accused of eating with like prostitutes and tax collectors and notorious sinners. And in doing so, he was trying to invite them into God's family, to give them a place to belong. And so anytime we have the opportunity to help someone in need, it also becomes an opportunity for relationship, for community, to bring a sense of belonging. I've just found that and many of the people who come in looking for some help from the church, as I just kind of talk with them, and I try not to be overbearing and all that, I want them to I don't want to attach any strings. You know, I'm trying to ride that line of like, I want to help you, but more holistically than just handing you something. And so often we'll have conversations, and one of the things I've just noticed is that many of the people who come in are very lonely. It just keeps showing up over. I'm not looking for it. I keep seeing it over and over and over again. They really seem to lack community, or at least like positive community, right? If they do talk about the people in their lives, they're usually complaining about them. And so, like, anytime you feel prompted to help somebody, it can be more than just giving them something, right? Like, it can be an opportunity to provide community and a sense of belonging, maybe to invite them into your home. Right? Invite them to join you to church on a Sunday morning. Like, every opportunity to help someone in need is an opportunity to invite relationship and belonging as well. Here's the bottom line. Like Boaz, we are called to practice generosity. We are called to help meet the practical needs of others, people in our lives, total strangers. And listen, I know this is really challenging for us, partly because like it takes resources that sometimes we feel like we don't have, right? But then also like, I think it's particularly because of our like social media saturated lives. Like, we live in an era where like the problem is not that we're unaware that there are problems in our world. Right? Like we are more aware than ever before. We are like almost overwhelmingly aware of just how much need there is out there. And it can be paralyzing. It can be really difficult to know what to do or where to start. And so often we just don't do anything. And we don't start anywhere. And that creates this really big gap between what the needs that we see and the needs that we meet. And we don't do anything, and we assume, well, this problem is so big, that's for someone else to solve. I can't do anything, so I will do nothing. And so in just a moment, I want to give us one small step, one small way that you can step into that gap and meet some practical needs of people right here in our community. So before I do that, I want to ask you a couple questions. These questions are designed to keep us reflecting on what God is saying to us beyond a Sunday morning. You can discuss these in the car ride home or journal about them later in the week. Here's the first one. When did someone meet a need in your life? And what did it mean to you? Let's personalize it for just a moment. How have you experienced in your moment of need someone else helping you? Chances are you can probably think of some ways where someone tried to do it the right way and it ended up very much so being the wrong way, right? But chances are you can also think of some times where people really did, like in a moment of significant need in your life, they really stepped up and really helped you in some important ways. Maybe even changed the trajectory of your life by the way that they stepped in and help you. I think it's helpful to remind ourselves of the power that has had in our lives so that when we look at the needs of the people around us, we can recognize that we might be able to do something similar in their life. Second question, how do the 4 expressions of Boaz's generosity challenge you to think about generosity in your life? Right? Boaz offered Ruth provision, protection, dignity, and belonging, as he sought to love God and as he sought to love his neighbor. How do those things challenge you? Like, how do those challenge you to practice generosity in your own life? Are there some of those that you think you do particularly well? Or are there some that maybe you don't do particularly well? Are there some there that you're not quite sure how you feel about it and you need to wrestle about it or wrestle with it a little bit with the Lord? But those 4 things, provision, protection, dignity, and belonging, how do they challenge you as you think about generosity in your own life? Last one, help someone in need this week. If you're not sure where to start, donate food to Journey Home's food pantry. So my challenge to you this week is to step up, even if it's just in a small way, right? Help someone who is in need. And someone might come to mind right out the gate, right? There might be someone in your life or that you know of that you're like, you know what? I've been thinking about this. I'm going to step over that line. I'm going to step up. I'm going to help them. But if you're not sure where to start, I want to give you a place to start. So I've been talking to Pastor Devin. He's the pastor over at Journey Church. And Journey Church started a ministry called Journey Home. And they do a whole bunch of things, but one of the things that they do is that they have a food pantry here in town. There are a handful of food pantries, and if you don't know this, like food pantries are kind of struggling right now. But Journey Home has been trying to step in and fill some of the gaps that have been left behind by all the issues with SNAP that have been happening right now, because I don't know if you know this, but I went and looked it up this week. About 8% of households in our county, in Brown County, are on SNAP. 8%. So the fact that SNAP didn't go through, at least not yet, I don't know, I haven't read the news in 20 minutes, but the fact that that's created a need. Right? And you can feel this way about it. You can feel you can feel a whole lot of things about this, but there are people hurting right now because this is happening, and it creates an opportunity. And so I have asked Pastor Devin what specific items they could use more of at the Journey Home in their food pantry, and here's the list of items that he gave me. And you can take a picture of this, or on the bulletins on the bottom, I have this on there as well if you're interested. They need protein. Specifically like small jars of peanut butter, canned chicken, canned tuna. They need boxes of cereal, rice, and then half gallons of milk. Not a ton of them. They can only fit like 30 in their fridge at Journey Home, but like those are their biggest needs, is those handful of things. And they're actually pretty well stocked, but they've also changed a bunch of their policies to give more frequently for people who are struggling right now. And so if you feel led, you can go take it straight to Journey Home, but if you have no idea where that is, you could bring it here to the church, and then I would love to take it over there. You can bring it next Sunday, you can bring it sometime during the week, but if you're not sure where to start, this is a good place to start. Because, man, the church has so frequently stepped into that gap that I was talking about. Right? Like the gap between what we're doing right now and the needs that exist in our world. That can feel really overwhelming. It feels overwhelming to me frequently. But I believe even if we take one step, we're still moving to help fill in that gap. And it provides us a ton of opportunities to provide a sense of belonging to people, to share the gospel with people. Like, stepping into that gap comes with so many opportunities, and we have an obligation as followers of Jesus to help meet the needs of others where and how we can. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this reminder. I don't think it's going to come as a shock to any of us that we live in a world of needs and that we should probably do something about it, right? I don't think that comes as a surprise to any of us, but I do think we need the reminder. And I do think that you have uniquely equipped the people of this church, Hub City Church, the people in churches around this community, to step into that gap. Can we fill the gap in completely? I doubt it. But we can do something. We can help in some small way. And I pray, Lord, that as we do so, as we seek to step into that gap, we can do so in a way that provides, we're offering provision, protection, but also dignity and a sense of belonging. I really believe this is possible because I've seen the example of it here in Ruth. And so, Lord, would you give us just a holy imagination for what stepping in and filling in some of these gaps would look like in our lives? That we would each take personal ownership, not of all of it, but of one little piece. And who knows, Lord, what you can do through one act of generosity in the life of someone we care about. Heavenly Father, we love you. We worship you. It's in the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.